I'm Hooves of Doom, and in this video, I'm going to deep dive into the meaning and language between the term Adeptus Astartes. So at the most basic level, the Adeptus Astartes is simply a cool Latin-esque name for what we colloquially know as Space Marines. And that's basically it. It's just a kind of a cool sounding name. But you can deep dive a little bit into the language here. And in the justification from the lore, there are basically two different levels of speech in 40k, one of which is called Low Gothic, which is basically Common English, a language that we all recognize and understand, and the other which is High Gothic, a form of language that mimics the sound and feel of Latin. Now, there are numerous examples of this division in 40k, but when we're talking about Astartes, Adeptus Astartes is High Gothic, and it basically means the same thing as Low Gothic Space Marine. So the concept of a Space Marine is fairly easy to understand. We've come to understand Marines as being highly disciplined and efficient soldiers, and the concept of deploying such troops to fight in space in small numbers has really been around since, at least the 1950s, with books like Starship Troopers, and kind of the concept and language of Space Marine really goes back even into the 1930s. But the term and language of Adeptus Astartes plays upon these conceptions, but in a way that is very unique to 40k. So let's explore some of the influences and connections that might have led to the creation of this name. Now, this will be a fairly deep dive linguistic investigation, so get ready. Alright, so let's take these two words and discuss them separately. First, Adeptus. Now, this is a genuine word taken directly from Latin, but the grammar and meaning in 40k doesn't quite work. At the basic level, the word in Latin literally means something that has been overtaken or obtained. But there's a lot more to this word and its historical usage. Latin is an inflective language, meaning that the form the word denotes in grammar in terms of case, gender, number, kind of change the meaning of the word. So every Latin word, there are several potential forms, and with nouns we call these kind of a declension, whereas verbs are displayed in conjugations. So we have here the declension of adeptus, generally noted as adeptus aum, to indicate it's kind of the first, second declension as an adjective. I've summarized this chart to basically the most basic form that we need to look at, and you can see this is the nominative case, and the word is singular and masculine. Now, what I love about this is that the Sisters of Battle, as the Adepta Sororitas, are using the same term in the correct feminine gender. So adeptus here is an adjective, and it is derived from kind of a perfect participle, or basically simply past tense, of the verb adipiskor. Now, this word is a compound word, itself formed from ad, meaning to or towards. Basically think of addition in mathematics here. Any type of prefix you see like this in Latin, that's what it means. It's going towards something else. And episkor, which means to reach after something, to pursue, to acquire or attain it. And combined, adipiskor means to arrive, to reach, overtake, obtain, acquire, to get possession of something or to achieve it. And adipiskor is a deponent verb. There are a few of these in Latin. Basically, this means that the passive forms have an active meaning, and adeptus actually is one of these types of forms. So you can find some exceptions here, but generally that's the type of rule. So here we can say that adeptus means kind of overtaken or obtained. Insofar as it is the past participle, it basically means something that happened in the past. So it would be generally translated as actively as having overtaken or having obtained. So we have this amazing word that creates connotations of action and movement and accomplishment. Now, that the desired goal, that which we are trying to overtake and obtain has actually been both pursued and already achieved. So in the modern English, the word adept is derived from adeptus, and we understand someone who is adept at an activity as being skilled, knowledgeable, and proficient. They stand out because of their distinguished achievement. So from a historical perspective, there are also connotations between the word adeptus and kind of alchemy and magic and the occult, and this acts to kind of further mystify the term and kind of the process by which we create the Adeptus Astartes or Space Marines. So it's like this amazing word that has all these connotations. It is both kind of active and past tense. It is also just something that really denotes skill and pursuing something. Now let's look at Astartes, the object that is actually being pursued, obtained, and achieved. Like Adeptus, Astartes is a legitimate Latin term with a very rich and complex cultural context. Astartes is the singular genitive or possessive form of Astarte. Now, this is a transliteration, kind of a cognate of the ancient Greek of Ishtar, who is an Eastern Semitic goddess associated with fertility, sexuality, and war. It's not unusual to have these type of competing associations alongside a war god. In the Greek context, desire and competition are often associated with warfare, and the Roman god Mars is associated with both kind of war and agriculture among many aspects. This is in part because the earliest Roman soldiers were also farmers, and the agricultural seasons operated in tandem with seasons of active warfare. So these are universal and seemingly unsatiated concepts, and you can really play around with kind of the concept of endless war and kind of the endless universe through kind of a Heraclitean lens in this context. I think that's a lot of fun to think about in terms of what this word is doing. And the fact that Ishtar is an Eastern deity isn't too surprising, perhaps, given the kind of the history of the emperor and the geographic locations of key places in 40k lore, like the Emperor's Palace. So this early god Ishtar becomes associated with kind of the Greek and Roman equivalents that are Aphrodite and Venus. Now, the connection to Venus is actually interesting because even in Babylonian text, Ishtar is the personification of the same star as Venus. And of course, the planet Venus is a particularly bright star that has importance in many different mythologies, including Tolkien with the star or light of Arendelle. Of course, this term Astartes was also likely chosen by the writers at Games Workshop because it has this playful, similar sounding sense to words like Astar and Astron that are among the words used for stars in Latin, and from which we kind of derive terms like astrology and astronomy. So we're left with these two words, and one that has kind of connotations of skill, pursuit, and achievement, the other having these really strong vibes about desire and warfare and kind of the brightest of stars. And when you combine Adeptus and Astartes together, you can kind of craft some crude meaning behind some very broken grammatical meanings here, along the lines of those that obtain the stars. Or perhaps something maybe a little more strongly like those that master the stars, those that pursue and achieve and obtain the stars, with really wonderful underlining tones denoting skill, achievement, endlessly striving, and even the mystical. Adeptus Astartes is a highly playful term. It's very creative. And obviously the grammar for both words doesn't quite work succinctly, but that doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to. High Gothic should be intentionally cryptic and kind of this perfect balance of the familiar and the unfamiliar. It is designed to imitate, but not necessarily mirror ancient Latin. So my point in looking at the language from a kind of a linguistic perspective is to just clearly point out that the influence in deciding on these specific words to describe Space Marines was very deliberate. And we know that many of the earliest employees at Games Workshops were really fan of the classics, so that they would have really known some Latin, and you can really see kind of Latin phrases on early banners and vehicles. And I would argue that if Adeptus Astartes meant something akin to reading donkey, then you could clearly say that the words were selected simply because they sounded cool. But the fact that they have these connotations, the fact that they have these underlying themes, suggests to me a much more creative, deliberately fun effort to find something that was meaningful. But yeah, I mean, I think this is absolutely amazing. So personally, I'm left with kind of the final question about when this term was first adopted in the lore. And in the earliest references dating from the late 80s and early 90s, the generic term Space Marine is used a little more regularly. I think it's mostly Space Marine, I believe, in something like Rogue Trader. And you don't really see the term Adeptus Astartes really whatsoever. And in fact, I don't think you really start seeing the term, as far as I could tell, to probably about 2nd edition, when many of the canonical terms become established and codified. I made a video a few years back on kind of the word demon spelled D-A-E-M-O-N, and I reached a similar conclusion, that there was a deliberate effort to mystify and create deliberately archaic terms and spellings at this early junction in the game. Now, from a lore perspective, something that might justify it in terms of the story, from the perspective of 40k lore, you can really look at kind of the story around the first founding of the Space Marine legions. And naturally, the term legions is borrowed from Roman history. We see this in lore. Kind of the term Astartes is established within the context of the Legiones Astartes. So in context with 30k and kind of the Horus Heresy, and although supported by other imperial forces, the Legioni Astartes were conceived as being largely frontline military forces. And then after the Horus Heresy, when these larger legions were disbanded and broken up into smaller forces, that are the Space Marine chapters we know today. Now, chapters operate differently from legions. And unlike a legion, these smaller elite forces specialized in planetary assault and special operations, right? They are a rapid strike force, a much more elite precision tool. And this is where kind of the new name Adeptus Astartes kind of entered the lexicon and becomes more used regularly. So it would seem that is when this concept and language is established. So I hope you found this investigation interesting. I think that this is, this combination of words is very much very playful in terms of its terms and meanings. I absolutely love this type of thing. This is one of the things that really drives me in terms of Warhammer lore. And thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that little like button, and subscribing for more Warhammer content.